Everyone knows about the 4 classes in Terraria and their strengths and weaknesses throughout the various stages of the game, though there's one silently agreed upon rule about them, and it's that you shouldn't mix them. But what if you did? Today I want to talk about the effectiveness of mixing melee and ranger throughout the entire game, as those are the 2 classes that, in my opinion, mix the best. Some things that are important to keep in mind about this playthrough is that most of it was in multiplayer with around 3 people on a small world in expert mode. If you think that this will impact my opinion, then go on ahead and say so in the comments. Pre-hard mode, general experience. As for pre-boss, it was basically regular Terraria. I mean, at that point it's fair to use any sort of weapon that's effective due to you being so weak. But once we beat our first boss, EOC, the divide between classes felt more pronounced through armor sets and accessories, and because at that point we had the power to effectively go for any class we wanted to. Also by this point, there aren't any ranger accessories since classes are very clearly established, but they aren't nearly as divided as they are in hard mode. Overall, during pre-hard mode, I'll say that the combination between melee and range was actually very useful by an equal amount. Armor prioritization. Thanks to pre-hard mode being more supportive of class mixing, I went for normal ore armor, which was tungsten, ninja armor for a very short period of time, and then shadow armor so my weapons can be just as powerful as possible since I took the mix between melee and ranger into consideration. I could have gone with the molten armor as I do prefer using melee weapons over ranged ones, but in the end it wasn't necessary as the shadow armor came through as a better option. Weapon prioritization. I actually went for melee weapons more in pre-hard mode mostly because they're more powerful, plus a Knight's Edge. Ranged weapons were still useful because it's pre-hard mode and they have range, but I'd say that I mostly stuck to what I preferred when fighting enemies. Of course, during this period, I could see myself using ranged weapons more if I preferred them, but overall both of these classes were very useful in my progression, as they complemented each other well in certain circumstances, like the Skeletron fight or underground scenarios. Overall, pre-hard mode's mixing of melee and ranger was solid, and it did actually help out a lot in specific circumstances. On top of this, the 3 main armor sets I had available, that was class mixing friendly, tungsten, ninja, and shadow armor, all were good enough to where it didn't feel like I'd be losing out on anything major for not choosing a more class specific set like the fossil set or the molten armor. Pre-hard mode overall benefits the most from this mixing, as they effectively cover each other's weaknesses without one being a clearly, consistently better option. Hard mode, pre-mech. General experience. Here's where things get actually interesting, as immediately upon entering hard mode, a clear divide in the classes is showcased by the ore sets and the emblem that the wall of flesh can drop. This meant that the power of my weapons would be way more dependent on accessories and class specific armor, as opposed to armor that's solid for melee and ranger or accessories that work neutrally for either one. Knowing this before I had even started hard mode, my plan was to go for ranger accessories and melee armor to try and balance this out. Instead, I realized that even if I didn't have accessories like the Ranger's emblem or magic quiver, Ranger would be far superior to the melee class during this period. Armor prioritization. As I said, I was going for melee armor throughout the entirety of pre-mech, though I was content with just having shadow armor until I got my surprisingly second to last set, the frost armor. Frost armor makes both melee and range attacks stronger, while allowing both of these weapons types to deal frostburn damage. This armor is very powerful, and I decided that throughout almost the entirety of hard mode, there was no reason to switch to a melee or range set, as this one gave both great buffs. So overall during pre-mech, this is the set that I prioritized going for, and it paid off greatly. Weapon prioritization. Unlike pre-hard mode, and despite my melee preference, I actually opted to use more ranged weapons, as these were more effective on the mech bosses and other enemies for obvious reasons. There's no world where I was going to try to kill Skeletron Prime with the melee that I had, when alternatively I had the Gatligator, Ice Bow, and Onyx Blaster. Range at this point was simply the better option, and though throughout pre-mech I definitely did use my melee weapons, it wasn't as much as my ranged ones. They are just better in most situations since currently melee weapons don't do enough damage to be worth the risk of getting close, and I didn't find any great longer range melee weapons yet like the Chain Guillotines or Shadow Flame Knife that would be effective enough against the mech bosses. Post-Mech. General experience. Post-Mech was pretty interesting as this was when my melee weapons started getting way more powerful. I acquired swords like the True Knight's Edge and True Excalibur, and I got the Flare on. Not much change accessory wise aside from my small switch to an Obsidian Shield over the Ranger's emblem due to this increase in power. Armor prioritization. As I said earlier, Frost armor is an amazing set. At no point during Post-Mech did I think that it would be a good idea to switch up, and for the foreseeable future, I thought that I should wear this very set for the rest of the game, until I had the idea to go for some Old One's Army armor. Me and my online acquaintances grinded this event out, and eventually got enough tokens for a full set of Shinobi Infiltrator armor, but I'll talk more about that later. weapon prioritization. I started using melee weapons way more during this period. Even with the heavy hitter from Duke like the Tsunami, range still wasn't comparable to the likes of the true Excalibur or especially the Flare-Ron. I even began replacing ranger accessories in favor of these new melee weapons because they were way better. Ranged weapons for me also were coming by less, and I felt less of an incentive to go for them for the aforementioned reasons. I say that it's well known that by this point, melee starts becoming incredibly powerful due to its good damage and slowly but surely its good range. So for that reason, using ranged weapons stopped mattering as much if I could just run in and shred enemies immediately or use melee weapons that can attack from afar. This isn't to say that using range was useless or anything. These weapons were still very useful, but if my Flare-Ron, for example, didn't have the range for its auto-tracking bubbles to attack, or if I was low on health and needed to retreat. Overall, melee started to become more preferable to ranged. This I think is probably more of a personal thing, but at some point in this game, I feel like the need to mix classes starts disappearing, and so you'll go with whichever class feels stronger or better to you. This can be more true in the final part of the game, Post-Golem. General experience. I'm lumping Golem in with Post-Plantera because I'm more than sure that basically everyone kills Plantera and then immediately kills Golem. Even though it took a little bit to do so, which only changed a single thing for myself. But by Golem, I pretty much made the switch to melee concrete in a lot of ways. Armor prioritization. I said that I was going for Shinobi Infiltrator armor, and now I want to talk about this, because it signified my full switch into melee. At the very start I had the idea to just go with Hybrid Ranger and melee all throughout, but by the end that was becoming less and less effective. Of course there are points where ranged or melee weapons for certain situations worked better, but after Golem that fact started becoming null. Even though I said I was going to go for melee armor in the start too, and ranger accessories, that never truly happened, and I had just been using hybrid friendly sets up until now. By this point it meant so much more to me in retrospect because this was the first decision to use melee armor in the entire playthrough. Frost armor helped both, and I'm sure I could have beaten someone like the Moonlord with it, but I only had one ranger accessory left, and melee was becoming far more dominant. So now I just awkwardly had ranged weapons in my hotbar that I only use sometimes, since if I needed range, I just switched to my Terrablade. Weapon prioritization. As I was talking about, melee became far better than range during this period, especially when I got the insane heavy hitter, the Horseman's Blade, and of course other swords like the Terrablade and Keybrand. The Horseman's Blade, in my opinion, is the second best true melee weapon in the entire game, right behind the Starlight Force insane damage. And the Terrablade is the Terrablade. It has some of the most solid crowd controlling, close and long range with two melee weapons, so ranged weapons quickly became irrelevant in comparison to this. I believe though that if I went about this differently, maybe prioritizing ranger more with ranged armor and melee accessories, that I could have easily went the other way with weapons like the Stake Launcher, Tsunami Tactical Shotgun, Candy Corn Rifle, Electrosphere Launcher, and so many others. But with how I played, it just wasn't optimal to mix classes anymore. Conclusion. Terraria doesn't promote class mixing at all. In fact, outside of Pre-Hardmode, it's almost completely unsupported. Only around 4 armor sets in the entire game explicitly are okay with it, i.e. the Shadow, Frost, Forbidden, Crystal Assassin, and if you want to count the Old One army sets, then those count too. And these are sets that I'm pretty sure almost no one uses due to there being class specific sets that are either just as powerful, if not more powerful than these. When you attempt to mix classes anyway though, at least with Ranger and Melee, the outcome in the end due to these facts is that one will probably win out over the other, due to a player finding one to be superior in some way. But hey, if you want to see this for something like Mage and Summoner, or something crazy like Summoner and Melee, then go ahead and say so in the comments. Leave a like and subscribe because I'm going to be making more Terraria videos. And Battle Cats for sure, if you are interested in that as well. Watch the remaining 8 Terraria videos I have and enjoy yourself. Goodbye.